Hello and welcome from the Developer Week 2019. I have with me Brandon Minnick. He is developer advocate.
That's
Did I
right.
spell it wrong?
Developer advocate.
Okay. And he just held a session about Xamarin and GraphQL. So Xamarin, I think in the .NET community, everybody knows that is something you take for writing apps for iOS and Android. But when you asked in the session who works with GraphQL, there only were a few hands that were in the air.
There may have been zero.
Yeah.
I think we had 0 hands.
Yeah, I thought I'd say a few. So I think nobody of the .NET developers know what GraphQL is. Could you summarize what it is?
Definitely. So, yeah, I guess going back just a little bit, one of the reasons why I wanted to give this talk today is GraphQL is it's a API endpoint that makes it more efficient to make API requests. And it's amazingly useful for mobile app developers like myself because it allows me to specify exactly what I want. So I can make fewer API requests. Actually, it's typically just one instead of many. And that one request will return only what I need. So less of the user's data plan gets used, less of the user's battery, their CPU, all those concerns that we have as mobile app developers are alleviated through GraphQL. But what's interesting is, like we pointed out, just about everybody in the session was a .NET developer, but almost nobody had used it. And this is something I find really interesting because GraphQL has become very popular in the JavaScript, specifically the React communities. And I'm from San Francisco, and I've been to meetups on GraphQL. And those meetups will have 100, 200 people at them. And almost everybody there is a JavaScript developer. Whereas when you go to maybe a .NET meetup and you say, let's talk about GraphQL, everybody goes,
What?
What's that? So there's this amazing new technology in GraphQL, and it's actually not even that new. Facebook came out with it in 2012. I forget when they open sourced it, maybe 2015. So it's been around for a couple years.
But there is a very broad used kind of API, which is called REST. So when you say there are much advantages from GraphQL over REST, could you say REST is dead now?
So yeah, there are a couple advantages. REST definitely is not dead. What's really interesting with GraphQL is it uses REST. So if you make a request to a GraphQL endpoint, it's the same as making an HTTP post request to a REST API or a post REST API. And so GraphQL essentially makes it more powerful. And you can even take existing REST APIs and wrap them in a GraphQL endpoint. So it's something that definitely augments REST. I don't think REST is going anywhere. But the benefits are with REST, if we wanted to return a certain shape of data, we have to create a very specific API endpoint for that. If we want to create a different shape of this, maybe same or similar data, we have to create a new API endpoint for that. With GraphQL, it allows let's say the user or the person or the client-side developer, so whether that's a mobile app, web app, it allows the client side to specify exactly what its app wants or its app needs, and GraphQL only returns that data. So there's a couple big improvements why I like it. We don't have to create a new REST API every time, which can be burdensome, especially if the REST API developers are on a different team than, say, the mobile developers from the web developers. So, we open a ticket, they maybe make that new REST API in a couple weeks, and we finally have access to it. Whereas, as a mobile developer, I can just tweak in my GraphQL query there on the spot, tell it, I want these specific fields back, and I get it. So we don't have to constantly create new API endpoints. And then there's also those problems where we have what we call cascading API requests. So maybe we pull down my user information, and now that we have my user ID, well, we can do another API request to get something else about me. And so now we have multiple API requests. And if there's multiple users for the app, well, then there's multiple of multiple, and it cascades very quickly. And that was something that Facebook realized and found out when they launched their mobile app was, our app is making dozens, if not hundreds of API requests. How do we fix this? And that's why they came up with a solution for GraphQL. So,
But there would be a very cheap solution only to send a SQL query string over the line and get the data back. Why didn't you do that, or why did Facebook do it?
Well, it is certainly cheap to start with, but it's very dangerous. You never want to give an application direct access to a database for all different sorts of security reasons. That means anybody can pass any query, and that's where we get into SQL injection, and bad things happen when you give direct access to your SQL database.
Of course.
And then on top of that, I would say the cost comes in when you have to clean up all that mess when somebody hacks into your database because you didn't secure it behind a nice API endpoint.
It was more or less a joke. Yes, but yeah, but it would be the cheapest solution, but totally unsecure.
Right. Oh, and I guess probably we'll say second good reason, when we're talking mobile apps don't have a reliable internet connection. You know, when I'm in my car, I'm switching between different cell towers when maybe you go through a tunnel and you lose the connection. And bad things also happen there if you were to talk directly to a database over a flaky internet connection. So yeah, security concerns, all sorts of concerns.
Okay. Last question. You mentioned that GraphQL comes from Facebook. How does Microsoft fit in there?
Oh, so yeah, Facebook invented it, but they have essentially yielded control over to what's called the GraphQL Foundation. So just like we have the .NET Foundation that houses important .NET projects like, for instance, like the .NET runtimes, there is the GraphQL Foundation. All that code is all open source, so anybody can go look at it. If you have any privacy, security concerns, the code's all there. And it's all maintained by the foundation now. It's not just owned and operated by Facebook anymore.
Okay. So thank you very much. Brandon Minnick from Microsoft at the Developer Week 2019.